Hi, and welcome to Chapter 20. On the flickering vid screens, Lucky could see the steel hangar outside with harsh white strip lights on the ceiling. It looked so cold. And clinical out there. Shadow guards were already stalking around the hull of the ship in their stealth armour. The comm buzzed again. Alien craft Sunfire, came their voices. Stand by for onboard inspection. Captain Knox came down from the cockpit, followed by Frolix. Everyone put on their mirror shades. Lucky prepared himself to face the shadow guards. He tried to stay calm in spite of the sickening fear that was rising inside him. He couldn't let it overwhelm him. The Sunfire's hatch opened, a hiss of cold air entered the warm cabin, and a shadow guard came on board, blotting out the air around him. Calm, calm, calm. Welcome to the Sunfire. I'm Ozymandias Knox, said the captain, extending a hand in welcome. The shadow guard ignored his greeting and started to survey the cabin. Bixa's needles had retracted all the way back into her hair, so they weren't even visible anymore. She stood behind the captain, staring at the ground in silence. Beside her, Frolix was beginning to shiver and shake, as he had on Leo 5. "What is the nature of your business at the space wall?" said the shadow guard at last. "We're civilians," said Captain Knox. "We've lived peacefully in the human worlds for many years. Now we're returning to Axis space." "Returning?" said the shadow guard. "Unusual. What's in your hold? Smuggling weapons to Theobroma's army?" "Of course not. Just provisions for ourselves." The shadow guard shook his head. "This is highly irregular. You must all leave the ship and go to border controls for further inspection." "That's impossible," said Knox. "One of our crew is extremely unwell and never leaves the ship. We keep the gravity low in her quarters because she's too weak for full gravity." The captain was far taller than the shadow guard, and he spoke in the most authoritative voice. "According to government regulations, this means we're entitled to an on-board inspection." "That applies to people," said the shadow guard. "It does not apply to you." "What does that mean?" said the captain. "Axis aren't people?" "The regulations are for human beings." Lucky's insides twisted as the argument built up. He didn't like the way it was going. "The regulations," protested Captain Knox, "clearly state that for hostile aliens in a time of war, there are no regulations." "But we're not hostile," said the captain, struggling to keep his composure. "We've got nothing to do with the war. We've been living under human rule for years now, and we have rights." "You have no rights. You will go through inspection, and then you will be held indefinitely while we process your case." "Indefinitely?" said the captain, fiery eyes flashing as his calm front finally cracked. He slammed a fist down. "By all the 12 Astræus, that's not fair." The shadow guard raised his cannon, pulled back the safety catch, and inside Lucky a spark of power began to rise. He could taste something like sulphur at the back of his throat. He could see the tips of his fingers begin to shine. "Welcome, welcome," said Mystica's voice. "Welcome to our ship, Mr. Shadow Guard. What is all this shouting?" Everyone turned to look at as the old lady hobbled into the cabin, leaning heavily on her stick, yet still somehow looking grand. Professor Bazantine was behind her, with Bazooka perched on his shoulder, feathers ruffled with tension. But Lucky was looking at Bixa. Only Bixa, and he was wrestling with his panic, struggling with his power. He couldn't lose control now. He made a massive effort to calm his mind and hold the power down. With every fibre of his being, he fought to rein it in. And gradually, he brought it under control. It was still there, burning inside him, but his fingertips weren't shining anymore. The power wasn't flaring up or spilling over. He was controlling it. For now. "They want you to leave the ship, Mystica," said Captain Knox, his great forehead furrowed. "And I would sooner die than let—" "No one is dying here today," said the old lady, as she turned the lights off behind her. "I will happily come." She smiled at the shadow guard, fixing him with all her charm until he lowered his cannon. "You do what you have to, sir. We understand. Truly we do." The shadow guard didn't respond. He just gestured at the hatch, emotionless. Mystica led the way off the ship, brooking no further debate. With Frolix and Bixa both helping, she climbed down to the ship's hatch. It was awkward, and it took a while, but eventually she stood on the ground. Captain Knox and Professor Bazantine followed her, and then Lucky went out last, still concentrating on keeping his power in check. Cold air slapped at his face as he left the ship. It tasted artificial. On a space station this size, it had probably been through 1,000,000 lungs already. Everything here would be minutely controlled and calibrated. A huge sign above them pointed the way to the border controls. They followed it into a long steel tunnel, which twisted sharply around a corner ahead. They couldn't see what lay at the end of it. The sheer scale of the place was intimidating, as if it was designed to make them feel daunted. Mystica walked slowly, with great concentration, like someone for whom walking wasn't entirely natural. You had to plan every step, tell each muscle what to do. Captain Knox lent her his arm, but even with his assistance, she was struggling. "You don't have to do this, Mystica," the captain said quietly. "You shouldn't be off the ship. You know you shouldn't. That Shadow Guard had no right." "Ozymandias," she said, "you were very brave back there and very gallant. But there was only one possible outcome, and no one could have done a thing about it." She grimaced and paused, panting in the cold steel tunnel. She was sweating despite the chill, but seemed determined not to show her pain. "Anyway, it's not so bad," she said. "It's not so bad." She started walking forwards again, a stick echoing on the metal floor, but she was wheezing hard and bent over almost double as she walked. "So what is our plan of action now?" asked Professor Bazantine. I confess myself at a loss. "We're in their hands," replied Knox. "Just pray to all the 12 Astraeas that they let us through." They moved on down the tunnel. Mystica and Captain Knox led the way. Frolix and Bixer flanked Lucky to the left and right, while Professor Bazantine and Bazooka brought up the rear. Without Lucky noticing, the Sunfire crew had taken up positions behind him, almost as if they were protecting him, shielding him with their own bodies. On the way down the tunnel, he glimpsed a corridor full of Axia who were travelling in the opposite direction. Some of them clearly had the living death. He could see the million-mile stare in their eyes like black holes in the sky. The adults were carrying overstuffed bags with pots and pans strapped to their backs. The ragged-looking children were clutching toys. They were a pitiful sight. "Who were those people?" he asked. "Refugees," said the professor. "They are fleeing the war, hoping to find safety in the human world. I do not think they will have much chance." Lucky gulped. All those Axia were hoping to cross the wall so they could leave the war zone. No one else was entering it, no one except him and his friends. At last they came to the end of the tunnel. Shadow Guards awaited them, faces obscured as always by their armour. Above them was a huge sign that said, "Border Controls." There were no other Axia here. They were alone with the Shadow Guards. Lucky's stomach tightened. Beside him he could feel Bix's fear and Frolix's. "Step forward," commanded one of the Shadow Guards, who sat impassively behind a thick shield of cannon-proof glass. "Show your idents." They all passed them over. Lucky surrendered his with a queasy feeling. He'd only just got it, and he hated to let it go. Would it stand up to inspection? He felt so conscious of his horns and hooves, his mirror shades and contact lenses. The Shadow Guard ran a scanner over Lucky's ident. Rows of vidcams swiveled towards him, making insect-like machine whirs. This place was like nothing he'd ever seen. Human power at its most faceless. All the surfaces looked like surgical steel, and it smelled of disinfectant, as if it had been swabbed down repeatedly, killing not only germs, but anything that lived. Behind the Shadow Guards, at the end of the tunnel, he could see only a pair of sealed double doors, with a conveyor belt beside them. A Shadow Guard pointed at Bazooka, who sat shivering on Professor Bazantine's shoulder. "You cannot take that creature with you." "But she accompanies me wherever I go," protested the professor. "The creature will be quarantined," said the Shadow Guard. "If found to be dangerous, it will be destroyed." He reached for Bazooka. Little Phoenix cowered away, her eyes clouded with fear. "Ba, ba, ba," she chittered. The Shadow Guard seized her and ripped her from Professor Bazantine's shoulder. Bazooka screeched, spurting little jets of fire, but she couldn't shake the Shadow Guard. She reached out for Professor Bazantine with her wings, and the professor was reaching for her too. "Please, sir, I beg you," he cried, "do not take her from me." But Bazooka was hauled away out of sight, and the Shadow Guards remained emotionless behind their stealth armour. "Take off your clothes," they ordered. Lucky shivered. It was bitterly cold in there. "Why should we?" demanded Bixer. "Take off your clothes and place them on the conveyor belt," said the Shadow Guard. "You and your possessions will be scanned separately. That way you cannot hide anything. Have you anything to hide?" "No, of course not," said Mystica. "Come on, Bixer, don't make trouble." Bixer scowled but said no more. Silently they began to strip off their clothes. It was so humiliating. One by one they removed their mirror shades, slid off their cloven hoof boots to reveal the bare feet beneath. Without his hooves, Lucky immediately felt clumsy and mal-coordinated again. The floor was freezing under the soles of his feet, and it stung. His skin came up gooseflesh as he removed his space traveller's coat, his shirt, his trousers. He stood there in his underwear, feeling tiny with terror. "All your clothes, you alien scum," said the Shadow Guard. Lucky lowered his eyes as he stripped it completely. He didn't want to see his friends humiliated, didn't want them to see him humiliated either, because he was a human, and here were humans treating him the way they routinely treated the Axia. It disgusted him. Even the word alien was beginning to sicken him. They're Axer, he thought, the people of the stars. Why can't anyone call them that? Why always alien and devil and scum, especially when shadow guards must have known the truth that was now so clear to see, that without their clothes Axer bodies were exactly the same as human bodies. The only difference was in the eyes. A pause.